Welcome, everybody, to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, where we look to crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of revenue growth, and more specifically, inbound revenue growth. It's exciting to say that today's podcast is sponsored by the Red Umbrella Group. The Red Umbrella Group specializes in training sales reps to consistently align value with their buyers, utilizing consultative and integrity based methods. So, sales reps are equipped to engage in high quality sales conversations that result in advantageous outcomes for both sides. Learn more about them at theredumbrellagroup.com and mention the show for a special rate. Before we jump in, here's why today's conversation matters. Imagine implementing just one strategy from today's conversation and watching your revenue metrics shift within weeks, not months. That's exactly what the goal of our podcast is. Let's talk about the revenue challenges others have faced and how they solved it. As I like to say, success leaves clues, and we're going to highlight those clues for you. With me today to talk about this topic is Jason Hubbard. So Jason and I are members of the Rev Room, and we set up a coffee chat to get to know each other. And I found myself asking him more questions than candidly he likely wanted to answer. So I asked him, said, "Hey, would you be open to doing a podcast?" And graciously he said yes. So Jason is a revenue leader, and I might even dare to say that he's a serial entrepreneur. He's held VP and C-level roles across sales, marketing, growth, partnerships, alliances. Sorry. He's also a COO at companies like Simple Control, Cirrus Path, Your Growth Expert, Circleback, SalesIntel.io, Astronomer, Rev Genius. And today, he's the founder and CEO of Demand Magic. Jason, welcome to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Carl. It's great to be here. I'll start off by saying I don't normally come on to shows like this wearing a tank top. I'm in Barcelona living right now, and it's over 90 degrees. So when I walked to the co-working space, I did not even think about being on camera today. But
That's totally all right. I don't think anybody's going to question any of your style. So, let's try to solve some revenue problems. And to kick us off, can you share a little bit of context around your world? What industries, what verticals do you work with? What are your selling motions? What size companies do you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in B2B SaaS for going on 17 years. Like you were saying, combination of companies I've started and run on my own as an entrepreneur, as well as VPC suite at those. Pretty much entire career's been around demand gen, marketing, partnerships, whatever flavor label you want to put on that. And so this is my second agency with Demand Magic. We provide growth marketing, demand gen services for B2B SaaS startups, in the Series A to Series B range. So pretty specific within our niche and intentionally small and boutique. I have no intention to try and grow and scale outside of, somewhere between 5 and 10 clients at any given time, depending on scope and size.
Nice. Well, that's it's perfectly topical because as I asked you the question, so how we got to today's topic is, what is the most successful revenue initiative you've ever led, or the most challenging one you've ever solved or are solving? And you quite literally you jumped out and said, "Well, I got one for you. It's both." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And you said how you said it was, it's how I 5x'd revenue for a SaaS company during COVID with zero inbound and growing the inbound revenue to 80%. So the elephant in the room, first question I think I have to start is, how the heck did you do that?
It's a great question, a little bit of a story, a little bit more detail on what we actually achieved. So in slightly over a year, we went from a standing start, zero inbound, to within a quarter we had 70% of pipe being generated by inbound. In the just over a year that I was there, we grew that to 80% of pipe and revenue, and we 5x revenue over that period of time while raising $500 million. So we were a unicorn that came out of the COVID. So it was a rocket ship. It was the craziest, most fun thing I've ever done in my career.
So your background, as you mentioned, is really like you talked about boutiques and everything and building revenue for others. When you went through this, generating or raising $500 million is is not an easy feat, but growing it from 0 to 80%. When you went and you took this role on, you said, "Here's what we wanna do." How did you start? Where did you look? What was sort of the first thing you did to say, "Hey, in order to get there, I need to start here?"
Yeah, so we had the game plan and opportunity you realized and mapped out the my CRO and myself before I even came on. So our very first conversation I had with my CRO, he was telling me about the opportunity that he saw and what we ultimately leveraged to be able to unlock this type of growth. And I told him at the end of the first call, I was like, we have to find a way to make this happen, because I was like, I'm literally salivating at the play at the sandbox. You're telling me I might have a chance to go play in. I was like, this is insane. And so, the quick background on that. So this was at Astronomer. Astronomer does data orchestration. If you're not familiar with orchestration, it's essentially the pipes that you plug into your different systems that allows you to be able to move the data around from one to another. And so you've got increasingly a complex tech stack and siloed data and stuff like that. So an orchestrator is what allows you to be able to tap into those and move the data around. So the key to kind of all of this, including how and why we raised $500 million, is that Astronomer essentially owns the open source Airflow project, which has largely won the standardization battle around orchestration to the tune of millions of downloads of Airflow. And so they own that because 70+% of commits to that core code are coming from employees at Astronomer. And so the upshot of that, and I'll get away from all the technical stuff, is that all the technical documentation, guides, KBs, all of that stuff in support of Airflow is produced, hosted, maintained, all of that stuff by Astronomer. And so if you're using Airflow, if you're curious about Airflow, if you're trying to migrate off of something, whatever, you're sooner or later going to wind up on Astronomer's website
Hmm.
because of that ownership of and production of all of that documentation. And so it was that traffic and that type of content that was being consumed that was the unlock for all of this stuff, and the opportunity that my CRO and I talked about from day one before I was even joined the team.
So, uh, how did you effectively decide where to play? Because as you said, you had a huge sandbox and you were salivating at it. Did you really narrow your niche in, out of the gate to define your go-to-market playbook, or did you create partnerships? Where did you first start?
So in some ways it was very narrow, in some ways it was very wide. So
Hmm,
who our ICP and targets were companies already using Airflow. So if you
mhm,
weren't using Airflow yet, like, we went through no education process. Like if you came to us and wanted to talk and you were not ready to transition to Airflow, or you were not already using Airflow, or you weren't already using a competing orchestrator, we say conversation's not ready to happen, because we had so much volume and such a large user base on the open source side of the equation. We were creating a enterprise grade layer on top of Airflow. That was what we were selling, and so we had such a huge pool to go pull from. There's no reason for us to talk to somebody that wasn't already there using an orchestrator, ideally using Airflow
mhm.
itself. But beyond that, an orchestrator has such wide use cases for it. So it can be used in virtually any department, any vertical, any size company, you name it. And so, it was very narrow from a tech stack standpoint. It was very wide from a, every other, way you slice and dice it standpoint.
Hmm. And it sounds like this is a market you're entering not as the or maybe I'm speaking out of turn. Were you the category creator, or were you entering a market that was already known?
It was a market that was already known. It actually reminds me a lot of the cells acceleration sequencing tool space in the very early days that those were first coming out,
Mm,
where you had different pieces of tech that had to be stacked together to be able to achieve a fully functioning stack around what you were trying to do from a data orchestration management transformation standpoint. And so everybody had their little niche of what they did within it. And this was going on at the time I was there and has continued. And it's the same thing that happened back whenever you had, for those of us been at this for a long time, you had Yesware and you had Boomerang and you had all of these different pieces of tech that would do little pieces of it. You had a
mhm,
Salesforce integration, you had an email tracking tool, you had and you had to stack all of these together to get a full sales acceleration kit. Over time, everybody's tech stack and feature sets started to overlap with each other, and so you combine that with first party internal development and acquisition. You end up with a handful of players that monopolize the space by having a totally fully integrated solution for it. And so we were in the midst of that process at the time, still continuing out in that space. And also had at the same time the tech being democratized. So
Hmm.
it had been so complex and so expensive where you had to have Python developers in house, and we're talking multiple of like a team of half dozen or so to be able to run something like Airflow. And so only large enterprises could do that for the longest time.
Hmm.
And so you wound up having tech, like what we were doing at Astronomer, that democratized that, made it more accessible, where you could do that with less overhead, less internal resource requirements. And so, starting to move downstream into smaller companies where, traditionally all that you had were what I've done my entire career. It was hacking your way at it using integrations, lots of duct tape and twine and all of that stuff, instead of being able to actually go and straight up plug into these systems and move your data around and do what you needed to do with it.
Hmm. Can we go into the tech stack? Because I think that's where I'm really curious on, because it talked. There's a couple of things that you've said. One is you create an alignment with the CRO to say this is where we're going to play. So what it makes me think is you had complete alignment on the targeting and where you're going. So you had some sort of system there. Awesome. That's something I'll maybe I actually spoke with Kyle Lacey about this topic, and in the previous episode. So it's really great to hear that you had alignment there. Now that you're going to market, now that you're going to pull them, how did you look at defining who you're going to target from a go to market perspective of company size? And on the back end of that is, how did you determine your tech stack that you wanted to use?
Yeah, so tech stack evolved, and we did very much a crawl, walk, run. I'm not somebody that gets in and, hey, we're going to do an audit stage and then we're going to do an implementation stage, whatever. It was, okay, here's the big levers that have, a lot of potential that we can pull relatively easily. So we're going to do that. Here's the things that are not no brainers that we need to stop doing, fix, whatever. And now we're just going to do this through a, evolutionary process with that. And so, immediate things that had to happen, like we had just implemented Salesforce. We had no marketing automation platform. I had inherited the website from some of the product devs. So like I had all kinds of tech stack, build out that I had to do. And, out of necessity, I've been a admin of, most of my go-to-market tech stack for my entire career. So I was hands on there, getting hands dirty in the weeds with my team on, actually architecting what all of this would look like and how it would all work. And we got, initial demand gen stuff going that, was the table stakes thing. So, we had to get content created. We had to start distributing it. We had to start building email lists. We had to start doing things like webinars, all of those basic things you got to do. Like we got those running at the same time we were building out the infrastructure for that. One of the most crucial pieces of tech that we implemented immediately was, some tech for us to be able to take educated guesses on what companies were coming and visiting the website and consuming this highly technical documentation, because those were incredibly powerful and useful intent signals for us. Because why would you come and read highly technical docs and guides on Airflow? Like this is not something you go and do for fun. So you're coming and you're doing this because you have a need, because you're actually either using it or trying to investigate how do you solve for a problem. And so that was where it was critical for us. We wound up adding 2 additional layers of that type of tech. I fully expected the first time I added a second one that it was going to be so much overlap, it wasn't going to be worth the hit to the site performance. And it was like, oh crap, that was 70% net new data that we pulled out of
Hmm.
that. And then, thought the same thing when we added the third piece to it. It was like, no, that was still 40% net new. By that point, we were identifying to the tune of 8,000 net new companies a month
8,000 net new companies a month.
that was coming and consuming highly technical, intent laden data and content. Like, so that was the unlock. That was how we did what we did. We had such volume of companies and people coming in and consuming such technical and detailed content that gave us such valuable intent signals. And so that was what my CRO and I talked about from that very first meeting, was like, this is what's here. We've got to figure out how do we, how do we operationalize this?
Mm.
How do we run this through tech stack? How do we actually put this to work? And that was huge. I mean, obviously trying to figure out how in the world do you run that at that type of scale and stuff like that. And, let's also, call a spade here. We were trying to target and reach out to and sell and do demand gen against devs and programmers on an open source piece of tech we're trying to leverage for go to market. Talk about the quite literally the most prickly audience you could try and run demand gen against.
Yeah, I don't know if they're or engineers, like true engineers that are building things like those two audiences are really hard to sell to and get them engaged.
Yeah, I mean, these were software engineers.
Mm, yeah, and so they just want to know they just want the answer, right? They don't want to go through the process.
And if they got a hint of trying to use the open source project to do demand gen, oh my god, they would light us up.
How so?
Oh,
How would
I mean, they get out on social media, Discord, like wherever they all. Because I mean, devs and engineers on the software side and stuff, they all live in communities. They all talk to each other. They all work collaboratively and all of this stuff. And so, the second we would trip ourselves up or do something that they didn't like, oh my god, it would just light on. I mean, go look at a Reddit thread where somebody misspeaks something.
right?
That's the environment we were operating in.
Yeah. Wow. How I have to come back because I have so many questions. But how did you get to understanding that you were getting 8,000 highly qualified viewers per month? You when you inherited the website. What kind of what was the kind of traffic you inherited? I guess there's the first question.
So there were it was essentially two. Well, I mean, if you want to get really technical, three sites that I inherited. So we had the marketing site, which was specific to what we were trying to sell, is that enterprise grade layer of Airflow that we were monetizing, and that was the site I owned and maintained and controlled. Then we had the Airflow specific site that was for all of the open source pieces of it, all of this technical documentation, all of that stuff. The only control I had over that was the tech that was allowing me to monitor and pull the data out of what was going there. And so, we had very minimal, negligible site to or traffic to the marketing site. We had huge traffic to the open source side of it, and but those were very distinct things. They were all under the astronomer.io domain, but they were very different. Sites, experiences, all of that stuff, and so it was to the point where I was not allowed to put anything anywhere in the nav of the open source side of things that would give them a direct route to click straight through to the marketing site.
How come?
Because we were both out of caution on my side as well as prickliness on our internal devs and engineers side of wanting to protect that open source side of it from us stepping on toes or overreaching and trying to more too aggressively monetize and go to market directly through and with that open source project.
So there's a nugget right here that I don't know that I want to just let it slip. You knew the audience so well that you knew to not drive them somewhere else, is what I'm hearing. You knew that if you're coming to the Astronomer website and you're going to the open source, I can't drive you to a lead capture or demand gen aspect because I'm going to lose you and I'm going to create chaos for myself. This is how I'm hearing that.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, even further than that, like we would shoot ourselves in the foot by actually creating a reputation of, hey, we don't actually care about this open source project and that audience above and beyond just our ability to directly monetize them.
Hmm.
And within that audience and who we were going after and stuff like that, like that was a cardinal sin.
How did you transition from that cardinal sin? And how did you generate it from you had 0 inbound, you started to get it. You have 3 different websites, they all serve different purposes. What was the journey like for you to generate that demand gen engine so that you're getting there? Where did you start with the complexity that you have that that we're hearing right now?
Yeah, part of the beauty of it was the fact that I had no other place to start. because all the limitations and concerns and all of that stuff. And so the only thing I could leverage was high quality, truly value add content.
Hmm.
And so that was the only tool that I could go out and engage with this audience with that was not going to blow up in our faces and blow back on us. And so that became the linchpin of our entire go to market strategy. And then we were able to get incredibly sophisticated with that. And we did that, in a few different ways. One, we were able to go and mine the data especially as we, our tech stack got more and more sophisticated, and we got it. Ultimately, by the end of this, we had created the most complex, sophisticated CDP, customer data platform, that I've ever heard of, much less experienced or built. So we were taking all of that website visitor data, all of those 8,000 net new companies a month, plus all of the ones we already knew about, down to the granular level of every visit by every person at every one of those companies. We were eating our own dog food using our own enterprise grade layer of Airflow to be able to pull all of that data out of there, push it into our giant Snowflake data lake. I had to go and poach a DraftKings analyst to the tune of 350, nearly $400,000 to run this thing. Um, so I mean, like this was, by the time you pulled in, tech stack, direct overhead, and this isn't even like the indirect. So like my salary wouldn't even be plugged into this. We were talking the nearly $1 million budget, well over a half a million. And so it was insane. But I could get it down to, by the time I fed a bottom of the funnel lead or meeting to a salesperson, more often than not, I could tell them, here's the tech stack that they need to plug into. Here's a specific pain point that they're struggling with. Here's what you're going to need to be able to address, and go ahead and debrief the sales engineer that's going to already be on the call with you. Typically, my salespeople, is not uncommon for them to be more up to date and have a better understanding of what they were needing than the person that was on the call with them. Or the other funny part was I'd equip and feed this information into like an outbound rep, and they'd call on the company and they try and hey, what are you using Airflow for? And they would get, yeah, we're absolutely not using Airflow. And it's like, no, you absolutely are. We're just talking to the wrong department. Like, you have no idea who in your company, what department, what use case is using it, but you're using it. Trust me.
Yeah, that's funny. Now that you've created all that, you understand it. What did that conversion look like? How did the sales team? How did you actually get it to the sales team? Because we're talking about inbound revenue versus sales. Like, how did that go?
It was one of the reasons why inbound grew so rapidly and to represent so much of our revenue, was because the only way we could convert that audience, especially as prickly as they were, was by basically giving them a path for them to move themselves along, and then ultimately raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm ready. I want to have a conversation. And so we would leverage all of that detail and information about what they were struggling with, what they're trying to plug into, what their use cases were, and then we would surface content that was truly valuable to them, and do that in a increasingly specific user journey from top, middle, bottom of the funnel down, leading them to a path of saying, okay, yeah, either they would raise their hand and say, I want to have a conversation, or we would be so confident in the signals we were getting that that was where and when we would start reaching out to directly to them. And even in that outreach, it would be in a value add way of, hey, I thought this might be interesting to you, this case study that we just released, or this guide that we just released that, oh yeah, hush hush, happens to be exactly what you're needing.
Huh. Okay. Now I in that motion, you hand the leads over, or the sales team is doing that outreach, they're having those conversations. Was the call to action that you were driving, use our platform, more of a product led growth strategy, or was it really a sales led strategy of pulling them in to say, you've learned all these things. I understand about your company. I see what you're trying to do. Here's how we help. What was that?
Yeah, so over the time I was there, we were able to start moving down market a little bit. But when I started, we were a high five figure enterprise solution, all the way up to 7, 8 figures.
Wow.
And so it was a highly complex, enterprise grade product with a high ACV. a relatively long sales cycle. So, most of those deals, and as you went up in that ACV value, the more it became all of those deals, required at least a 30, in most cases 60, 90-day proof of concept, because we had to get in and help them build and integrate and tie this into all their systems and prove that it would work. The reason why, more often than not, we literally had a account executive and a sales engineer on those calls from the very first call. It was that technical of a product. And so it was a complex, long sales cycle. The plus to it was the switching costs were absolutely enormous. So churn was a negligible concern for us. But yeah, but being able to drive inbound as your growth engine for that type of a product at that kind of a price point is kind of insane.
Yeah, and it's still rattling around my head is okay. You knew what it seems like to me is you went and tell me if I'm way off. You looked at your audience and your market and you said, these are the specific types of buyers or companies we're looking for. Because there's this notion of ICP. I don't like the term because I think of it as two ways. Is it ideal customer profile or ideal customer persona? And which one is it? I think you have to marry the both of them, but that's a
Exactly. I
totally
would I
different.
would agree with that.
And so it sounds like you went, I understand the ideal customer profile. This is the persona that I'm dealing with. And the best way to operate with that persona is high value content because they are these types of engineers. Now that you get them into a psych, now that you, and sorry, am I even close?
You're close. This is where the sophistication really kicks in. So this was not a linear. This is where we had multiple flywheels that were pulling, flowing back into each other. And so, we had them coming to the site. We had them consuming the technical docs and all of that stuff, which was giving us incredibly powerful signals. We were marrying that with, external third-party intent signaling or intent proxies, like going and mining stuff from job boards. Who were they hiring? Who were they looking for? What titles? All of that stuff. So we're proactive. You don't come in as a VPC suite within those titles or roles where you would be responsible for something like a data orchestrator to come do the same thing that was being done before you came in. And so that was an ideal time for us to leap and get in front of them. We were running ads, and we'd run the ads in different flavors and different reasons, motivation strategies around them. We would run ads in a full funnel motion, because running those bottom of the funnel ads, that we're trying to get a conversion at, something like raising your hand, I want a demo, or I'm, want a pricing quote, without having, warmed them and nurtured them, is astronomically expensive. You couldn't get an ROI on it. And
Mhm.
so we would do this where we would serve them, content focused value add awareness ads. And then we would track engagement with those visits to the site, stuff like that. And then we would move them down and we would do, value add, conversion, focused ads around like webinars or something like that. And then it would only be that sliver of people that had given us really, really strong intent signals that we would serve those really expensive bottom of the funnel ads. But all of this data we're generating out of the ads is getting fed back into the system and back into Snowflake for the analyst, as well as like the job board stuff, as well as all of our first party intent data around like email opens, clicks, all of that stuff, site visits, what the outbound team's doing, who they're reaching out to, who they're getting in touch with, who's engaging with on that side. And so, like, the number of signals we were feeding back into this on feedback loops was absolutely insane. And then, one of the unlocks with it was I started having our content team starting to develop what I came to call engineered intent signals. So we would create things where it was like, it'd be really, really weird if somebody was coming and engaging with this, because it's so specific, if they did not actually have the intent that we engineered this content to show.
Okay, let's talk about that one. Engineered intent signals, because I'm fascinated with what you've talked about. Your intent model and where you're pulling sources in. I don't know that I've heard somebody say it's as expansive as what you've just explained to me. Engineered intent signals. What went into it? How did you even bring that to the table? And when you brought it to the table, when you said, "Hey, sales team, this is what an engineered intent signal is," how did they respond?
Oh, you give me way too much credit for how I approach things. Uh, Yeah, this was something that sort of evolved. It was kind of one of those aha moments of like, oh, hey, that's kind of what that looks like or feels like. It was like, because I was looking at it and saying, okay, hey, there's a piece of content. It's like, that's really specific. And, it was like, huh, that'd be really weird if somebody was engaging with that and they were engaging with it for any other reason than this. And then it was like, okay, I'm a growth marketer through and through. So everything is, data first, data centric, data driven, constant, rapid iteration, constant testing, all of that. And so anytime I catch something like that, it's like, huh, then it's okay. Let's get MVPs together. Let's start testing that hypothesis and stuff. And so, and, that was part of the struggle that we had from two different standpoints. One was, we had all of this data and all of these flywheels and feedback cycles and loops and all of that stuff. And we had this incredible, CDP and an analyst and all of that stuff. But like, it was easy to get drowned in the noise. I mean, there was so much there, and so we had to find one of our biggest challenges is strategies for being able to separate, the noise from the signal, so that we could actually figure out what to act on and stuff. And so, one of the easiest ways to do that always is to insert your own known signal in there, so that you can then start seeing, okay, here are the things that correlate with that signal that we know is an actual signal. And so that was one of the purposes of those, engineered, intense signals we started generating and creating with it. And those also were key for us on that, full funnel motion where we could create those, engineered signals that would give us not just, hey, here's what their focus or interest was, or are they bottom of the funnel, but we could do that in such a way that was like, okay, that indicates that they're most likely middle of the funnel.
Hmm.
And so now we're going to start prioritizing and serving up this type of content or these types of ads or whatever. And so, we would engineer content to give us signals around all kinds of different things. And it was, going at that from, okay, here's something they could engage with that's going to give us a, data point and a signal, and then we're going to go and we're going to verify, does that look like it actually correlated to what we designed it to correlate to?
Hmm. Eh, Did you have coming back to the relationship with the CRO? Did you and the sales team say, here are the top 1,000 accounts that we want to work with, and those are the 1,000 that was that an input into that engineered intent signal, so that when they come in, they're directly connected to the sales team to say, hey, go chase this one, or this one's interested? What was
Well,
that relationship?
for account executives, until the very end, right before I left, they did zero outbound. I was feeding them every meeting they had, and their schedule was full. They were not doing full motion. They were taking qualified, sales qualified leads with a demo already booked and taking it from there. That was the handoff. Again, we were generating 80% of pipe and revenue by the time I left. And that was where we had some interesting struggles and stuff like that on, because we were sort of turning the model on its head for the outbound BDR team that we were in the process. We were probably about a little over a quarter into building out and operationalizing, where it was like, we had such insanely strong intense signals and knowledge around, that the company at the company level, that they were qualified from a tech stack need, whatever standpoint. But we struggled mightily with who we needed to reach out to and talk to at that company. Again, back to that, it's not uncommon for them to reach out and say, yeah, we definitely 100% do not use Airflow. And it'd be like, nope, you're wrong. But we have no idea who we need to be talking to inside of your organization to be able to try and figure
Hmm.
that out. And you can imagine, like, these are pretty big organizations. We're talking, at a bare minimum 5 all the way up to 7, 8 figure contracts.
Right. Where did the relationship with the outbound BDR team then come into play? Was the outbound BDR team underneath marketing? Was it underneath sales?
So it was underneath me on the growth side.
Okay. And did they have a different set of accounts that they were targeting to try to get into it? Yeah.
Yep, yep, yep.
Oh, and so did you look at the outbound BDR team as I'll just use this as a potential example, is like, we want to target manufacturing companies, just as an example. Outbound, you're going to target that vertical while we're going to focus on these verticals, SaaS, etc. Or how did you delineate outbound versus that heavy intent inbound function?
We didn't. They were a piece of the machine.
Okay.
So one, they were generating their own signals for us to consume and feedback into it. We were also feeding them the signals we were seeing on our sides for them to better prioritize who they were going after, where they were spending their time and attention, as well as what they were serving up to them in their outreach and all of that on that side of things. I wound up having to do a very crude experiment that I've had to do most times at some point, because BDR teams, outbound teams, have always been under me at every organization I've had one at, and on the marketing demand gen side of things. And this is going back, like I said, 16, 17 years now.
Mhm.
So, it's become more common. But when I first started doing this, that was kind of, really eye raising. But the experiment that I constantly have to run at some point or another with, my C suite is somebody would be like, huh, really looks like these BDRs are not, generating an ROI, relative to their cost structure in this. And it's like, all right, no real other way to be able to show this to you definitively. So we're going to carve out the accounts that they're going to go after, and they're going to do this without any air cover alignment, whatever, with what the marketing and demand gen team's doing. They're just going to go and send emails, reach out on LinkedIn, pick up the phone and dial. And then we're going to go over here and we're going to do our demand gen stuff, running ads, content, all of that stuff, trying to get people to come in and raise their hand voluntarily. Like, let's see what happens. And normally we'll propose it as like, hey, this is going to be a few week, month-long test, whatever. Never once have I had it run for more than a week,
Mm.
because what you start seeing pretty immediately is, hey, the conversion rate on those accounts that the reps are outbounding to drops by about 50%. Meanwhile, my paid campaign theme, which is the easiest one for us to be able to track and be able to actually measure, hey, what's our cost per click and what's our cost per sales qualified lead conversion do? They'll typically go up somewhere between 30 and 70%. And so, me being able to go and say definitively, hey, was that a rep outbounding? Was that an email sent? Was that a phone call? Was that an ad served? Whatever, from a direct attribution standpoint, and say, hey, here's where the direct ROI is relative to spend. It's like, that's the dirty secret about attribution, and where people get so hung up on direct attribution from a digital standpoint. It's like, that's not actually how it works. It's all of these touches across all of these channels that add up to drive that. And oh, by the way, the sum of every one of those parts is wildly greater than each of them individually.
Mhm.
And so that's the key to why and how I always have that department under me on the marketing side. And from a, how do you compensate these people standpoint, I say, if you logged a touch that I can tell that you did that before they came in inbound, because that's the other thing. Most people are like me. I'll go bang my head against the wall for 5 or 10 minutes with a god awful website and checkout process if it means I don't have to pick up the phone and talk to somebody for 2 minutes. It's the same thing on that side of thing. Even though they've had this rep reaching out to them, they're not going to reply to them directly. So 50+% of those that they're calling on are going to come in through the website,
Mhm.
and especially it was even much higher than that actually in this case, because again, these are devs, engineers. They really don't want to talk to people. And so if they log a single touch and then they inbound, I give them credit for it.
I really like that you said that because I find that to be a challenge is great outbound drives inbound, in my opinion. And at some point, there's a conversion point. I could be prospecting Jason, I could be prospecting you. And just like you said, I don't want to talk to Carl, but I'm getting his content. I haven't deleted it. Great. But then you go, well, what is this company? Oh, I'm going to bang my head, as you mentioned, bang your head against the wall. I see that now. I fill out a form. Now I'm in conversion. Well, if you don't actually do the due diligence, it looks like it's a marketing conversion. However, it's a holistic view of uh, specifically targeted outbound, and it's driving the connection point between marketing and sales.
Yep. Yep, exactly. And then,
Amazing.
like it's like it's a whole bunch of feedback loops and flywheels going. It was every one of these pieces of it all coordinated together, where it was all giving us better signal. It was all dialing in what we were doing on all sides of it, and that's
Mhm.
that's how we did it.
S so my last 2 questions that maybe to get an idea. Um, how big was your marketing team, and how big was your budget to generate all of what you just walked us through?
So if you carve out the CDP part of it, the data analytics piece of it and stuff, so that was where I said it was over $500,000 between tech stack, and we had 350 to $400,000 that just with one person's salary. But as far as traditional marketing demand gen growth sides of things, uh, we had about 25, maybe 30 by the time that I left on that entire side of the equation. So, that was content, that was marketing ops, that did not count the outbound sales team. So if we did that, we were probably pushing 45, 50 with that. Paid budget. I mean, this was one of the funniest things to me, and I still laugh at this to this day. So my business partner who's with me at Demand Magic, still, we've been together for nearly 7 years across three companies. And hired him way back at Sales Intel, his first B2B SaaS job that he ever had. But he was running my paid campaigns there. Uh, we were generating our own budget out of our own ROI for our paid campaigns, even though we'd raised $500 million, because we were generating more inbound volume than my CRO could grow the sales team to handle. So money was going to be wasted if we threw it at that paid budget, because we couldn't effectively go in and leverage what we were doing.
So what did you do? Were you able to just hire more reps to be able to handle that
We
mass?
were, I mean, that was what we were doing at the time I left. Like, we were literally hiring and building out the sales team and the account executives as quickly as we could scale it.
Wow. That's very cool. So your team was your team size was upwards of 50, the paid budget. But when you joined, it doesn't sound like it was you. How big was the team when you joined?
Me.
Just you. Okay. So the reason I'm asking the question is somebody listening in, they can, all the CDG and all the stuff that we talked about. You can go, okay, yeah, that's huge. I don't have the budget for that. You started as a one man show, if I can say it that way,
Yep.
and you built it up. So as we sort of transition to wrap up, because I've taken way more of your day than you probably want to, and I could ask you way more questions than I think I have. But as somebody who's listening to this and said, "Okay, I wanna do what Jason did, but I don't have a budget of a massive company." What are the 2 or 3 things that you would say, "All right, in order to do this, here are my 1, 2, or 3 key things for you to go and do on Monday. Look at these places, and you'll have a path to what I built." What would you tell
Yep.
somebody?
So a few things. I'll try and keep it down to three or four. One, you're going to be in the weeds, and you're going to be hands-on, in the trenches doing this. Obviously, if you're the only one or there's only a handful of you, so take an honest assessment of what your skill sets are and what you're good at, and then go and backfill those. So that you're not having to go and do everything, and in particular, those things that you're not good at. For me, one is dev. So you don't want me in doing web dev on a website. I can tell you that. The other is design. I know how to put design to work, and I know what good design works looks like, and how it's going to be used to convert. I can't do design for crap. And so if you find me doing either of those things, then we're in serious trouble. So those are two of the very first things that I make sure that I have covered, whether that's hiring internally or outsourcing to a third party, whatever. So take an honest assessment of what you can do, what you're good at, and what you're not. Website, obviously, if you're going to do marketing or inbound, your website's got to be in a decent place. It's got to be conversion rate optimized. You've got to have clear paths, all of that stuff. Otherwise, everything you're doing and all of that effort, time, energy, and as you start doing paid budget and stuff like that to drive people to that site, if once they get there, it's not optimized, then that's all for naught. It's all wasted. Similar story on the tech stack and RevOps, marketing ops side of things. If you don't have that operationalized, then you've put all of that time, effort, and energy trying to get somebody in to convert. That's then more likely than not going to fall through the cracks. So make sure you got your downstream systems and processes and tech stack built out and optimized. Because holy hell, that's so awful to do all of that work and then have it all be for naught and be wasted. And then the last one is content. Content has always been king. Content is more king than it's ever been. The more that go to market and growth at all costs falls apart and becomes a distant memory, the more things come back to the basics. Creating value add content has always been critical. Everybody got caught up in thinking that there, in a lot of ways, there's an entire generation of us on the demand gen side of things that never had to learn how to do things right because they had easy buttons. Those easy buttons don't work anymore. So time to go back and relearn how to do things the right way that we should have been doing it all along and wound us up in the scenario to begin with.
Hmm. Very cool. What I heard from you there is build a plan, build your team that is going to enhance your skill sets, not drive you into different places. I totally agree with you. Um, and then make sure your systems are connected, and make sure that as you're building your entire flow and your funnel, you have enough content that is going to support your team across the stages and situations where the buyers are top, middle, bottom,
And is valuable to your buyers.
and is valuable to the buyers. It couldn't have left a more better last statement. So thank you, Jason, for doing this and talking through us today and helping us solve us. And that's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers. I want to thank you, Jason, for sharing these incredibly invaluable insights today, strategies that you obviously can hopefully hear that you can put into action on Monday. If you found value in today's conversation, please like the episode, subscribe. If you have feedback, please share with me. Like, hey, this is good. I like that. I didn't. If you have a topic, let me know. Or if you want to be a guest, I'm all for it. Come on board. Thank you for investing your time today. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to have it. Until next time, this is Carl with Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn obstacles into opportunities. Thank you for being with us today, Jason.
Thanks so much, Carl.
See y'all.